there's very little action being done. There's, in fact, nothing that we feel is being done in order to counter this wave of anti-Semitism that we see in the streets. And that's a concern. I always say I could live somewhere where there's a few anti-Semites around. We know they're a fringe, loud minority of extremists, but to live in a place where you feel that you're completely abandoned by all three levels of government, it's a hard pill to swallow, but I think we've accepted it, and it's making people maybe change their mind about having a future here.
So I'm with Lior Bibas. He's cardiologist and president of the Quebec Jewish Physician Association. And recently we had the news that there is a surgeon that decided to leave the province of Quebec. We had Gatsad, who actually left Canada. And now the situation since October 7th didn't change at all. We have anti-Semitic attacks happening often. We have regularly those protests taking place in our streets, spewing anti-Semitic slogans. And what the new mayor did or the chief of police did, absolutely nothing. So we want to speak to you about it, how the situation have evolved in Montreal.
Well, unfortunately, for us, it's a new reality since October 7th. And what we're still seeing is incidents of hateful slogans being yelled at, hateful assembling of people, and also, unfortunately, very little action or consequences. It's as if anti-Semitism is not really a concern anymore, and really no action on all three levels of government, be it municipal, provincial, or federal.
Mm-hmm. Because those protests are taking place, and we saw recently a Jewish effigy on the news during a protest. Montreal for Palestine then said, no, it's not a Jewish person, it's Ben Gvir. But for the people who don't know who is that political figure, they just see like a Jewish on the news in the middle of the street. How the Jewish community is reacting when they see what is actually on full display in our streets, and the police is just there and just looking and doing absolutely nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's very discouraging what's happening. I would tell you that people aren't surprised anymore that these things are happening, but the real concern that I have, and a lot of my community members do have, is that there's very little action being done. There's, in fact, nothing that we feel is being done in order to counter this wave of anti-Semitism that we see in the streets. And that's a concern. I always say I could live somewhere where there's a few anti-Semites around. We know they're a fringe, loud minority of extremists, but to live in a place where you feel that you're completely abandoned by all three levels of government, it's a hard pill to swallow, but I think we've accepted it, and it's making people maybe change their mind about having a future here.
Since you are the president of an association, and you are talking a lot with the community, do you see more people who wants to leave the country?
Yeah, so look, I'll be honest with you, it's not really a physician thing. I would say most of the Jewish community here has had conversations multiple times over the past few years, whether they see a future for themselves. There's already a few people that left. You mentioned a few more prominent ones, but there's already a few that are leaving, and I know of a few other doctors and a few other community members that are already planning their departure. I totally understand them. Already as a physician, we work in a healthcare system that is, has terrible constraints. We saw what happened with the La Loi 2, the law in October. Already we had doctors that were already planning to leave. And then when you add on top of that, the inaction of the government with regards to the rise of anti-Semitism here, a lot of people with kids are asking themselves, like, is there a future here for my children? And when there isn't, you start reassessing where's the best place to raise them. And I think that's what's happening here. A lot of people are considering leaving Quebec and Canada because of what's going on here, and because, unfortunately, of the frailty and the weakness of our leaders.
Mm-hmm. Can you explain how this anti-Semitism is being expressed in the healthcare system?
So a lot of my members, especially the students and residents, have faced anti-Semitism. A lot of them have been excluded from groups called anti-Semitic tropes, feel not listened to. We know that medical schools, we have tried to speak to them on multiple occasions. They don't even answer our emails. And unfortunately, not enough is being done to fight anti-Semitism. In fact, I don't think anything is being done on a day-to-day basis to address what's been really the one of the fastest rising forms of hate that we've seen in the past few decades. We see it targeted against Jews in Canada. So it's discouraging. On a personal level, I'm not planning on leaving. I believe that we have a role to play and we need to continue fighting. But I also understand people that have had enough and feel that there's no future here and it's time for them to leave.
And especially like we saw what happened in Australia and in Europe regarding some people in the medical field saying that they don't want to treat Jewish patients or they would just let them die.
Let's say an Israeli, God forbid.
I won't treat them. I'll kill them.
You'll kill them? So if an Israeli is in Australia and God forbid something happened to him and he comes to your hospital,
I hope to God.
Would you kill him?
You have no idea how many Israeli Khara dog came to this hospital and I sent it to Jahannam.
For real?
Sent it to Jahannam.
How the community feel about this? Because, when you need a doctor, you don't want to stress, you don't want to be scared to go and to see a doctor.
Yeah, so first of all, I'll start by saying that I believe in a healthcare system that needs to be completely apolitical. Leave your politics at the side, whether it's regards to the conflict in the Middle East or anything else. What should be at the center of healthcare is the patient, and that's the most important. That being said, we have seen well-documented episodes of anti-Semitic Jewish discrimination against Jewish patients, specifically in England and also in Australia. That is very concerning. We haven't objectified people saying the things that were said, like, for example, with the nurses in Australia. But I would say the Jewish community is concerned. We hear concerns all the time about people, looking up their doctor. Is this person safe? Is this the right place to go? Which shouldn't be any concerns to any Jewish patients. We're working on a way to work on a survey in order to objectify that. But unfortunately, it is very concerning where we're headed.
Because we see what is happening in Europe, and we are seeing the rise of anti-Semitism. And do the community here are scared that Canada is becoming what Europe is at the moment?
So I think there's a concern, notably because of the weakness of leadership. We haven't seen any concrete actions, neither on the municipal level, the provincial level, or the federal level. In fact, many of us feel that we have been completely abandoned by the government, especially when we saw Mark Carney's announcement of an anti-Semitism council, which I thought was a prank. I thought was a joke. I couldn't believe what he thought was a solution to anti-Semitism, as if we need another group of more bureaucrats, and especially some people that have questionable, to say it very lightly, relationships with the Jewish community. Do we really need them to declare that there is anti-Semitism?
Since being elected a little over a year ago, our government has been acting, first and foremost, on the most fundamental responsibility of government, protecting our citizens. We've introduced 6 new pieces of legislation to bolster public safety and to combat anti-Semitism specifically, as well as other forms of hatred. Foremost amongst these 6 bills, Bill C9, the Combating Hate Act, addresses directly the rise in anti-Semitism, hate-motivated violence, and the targeting of communities. It significantly strengthens the criminal code. It significantly strengthens the criminal code by creating new offenses for intimidation, obstruction at places of worship, schools, community centers, and other institutions used by identifiable communities.
I do have a lot of members that were physicians in France and then moved here because of the anti-Semitism and because of the bleak future that they saw for their children in France. And a lot of them say that they didn't expect things to get this bad so quickly here. And a lot of them say, had they known, they probably wouldn't have come to Quebec.
Yeah, this is a thing. Like, what do you think of these new committee to combat anti-Semitism? But when we look at the people who are on this committee, there is almost no Jewish people. And there is Omar al-Jabra, who literally wanted that Hezbollah and other, like a terrorist group, was not listed as terrorist organization.
I mean, it's completely concerning. It's a joke to all Jewish Canadians. It's insulting. I think you don't need a council to see why there's anti-Semitism. You need action and you need strong leadership. And unfortunately, our leaders today are very weak. They're not able to take any decisions with moral clarity. We need leaders that are able to maybe disappoint a small fringe minority, but to the betterment of Canada. And unfortunately, they're not doing that. They're being complacent to the rise in anti-Semitism. They're being completely indifferent. And honestly, they're part of the problem.
Mm-hmm. Because you mentioned that you have now some French citizens who moved to Canada because of what is happening regarding anti-Semitism in France. What they told you about what is happening with Canada?
So they feel it's not heading in the right direction. It's many Jews now feel not comfortable wearing Jewish symbols around Montreal. This wasn't the case just 3 years ago. So to see how things have deteriorated so quickly, we've had multiple arson attacks, Molotov cocktails. We've even had gunshots shot at our schools over the past few years. We had an incident last week in Westmount. And unfortunately, despite all that, there hasn't really been any change in policy, any change in action. There's really hasn't been anything done to curb anti-Semitism. So it's very disappointing from that perspective. I held a bit more hope with all the recent changes in elections that we've had, both at the federal and municipal level, but unfortunately, I haven't seen any difference.
Where do you think that's come from, this anti-Semitism? Because obviously in all society, you will always have some people who are anti-Semite. But after October 7, we are seeing a blatant rise of anti-Semitism. Is it due to social media? Is it due to the school system? What is the cause?
So look, anti-Semitism is thousands of years old. I like to say that it mutates from place to place, generation to generation. I think what we're seeing now is anti-Semitism, but also anti-Zionism, where anything that is associated with Israel is immediately seen as a cancer, as the worst possible thing. And any person, especially Jews that identify as supporting the simple existence, many Jews are not in agreement with the government. It's totally fine to criticize the government. I have no issue with that. But Israel's the only country that is continuously questioned on its very existence. You have people asking for the destruction of Israel and 10 million people. That's genocide. That's what they're calling for. And unfortunately, nothing is being done. And we have to take a stand. We have to call it for what it is. Anti-Zionism is a hate movement. And it is related to anti-Semitism. And I think, unfortunately, now we have a bit of both. I think it's cyclical. I think in our societies, we're always going to have people that hate Jews, that blame all their problems. Instead of looking inwards, they look outwards at other groups. But the solution to end anti-Semitism for good, we don't have it. But there is a solution that I think could be very obvious, is that we need strong, capable leaders. We have a law and it should be applied. Calling out in slogans against the only Jewish state, in favor of its destruction, glorifying recognized terrorist organizations that have killed, thousands, not only Jews, but of, civilians across the world, does not have its place in our society. And in fact, Montreal is looking more and more embarrassing on the world stage. It seems like, you don't see a week that passes by where Montreal is not on the front page of sometimes international media because of the rise in anti-Semitism. So we need our leaders to get their act together.
People who are here, who are not citizens, who are supporting terrorist organizations, who are committing vandalism, who are chanting anti-Semitic slogan, they should be deported back. If you agree, go and sign our petition at deportamas.com right now.